Dr. Whitney makes $420,000 a year. She is a cardiologist in Nashville. She drives a car with a payment bigger than most people's rent, and she has, by every visible measure, made it. 2 floors below her, in a glass office building downtown, a woman named Marissa Hale runs marketing for a mid-sized beverage company. She makes $190,000, wears the kind of blazers that make interns nervous, and just got back from a work trip to Miami that she posted about, obviously. On paper, these 2 women are winning. If you looked at their income statements side by side with almost anyone else in the country, you would assume their lives are a straight, uncomplicated climb toward comfort. Here is the part nobody tells you. Both of these women, despite the income, despite the title, despite the vacation photos, are 2 missed paychecks away from panic. Not because they are careless, not because they're bad with money, because something much stranger is happening underneath the surface of their success, and it has a name most people have never heard. It is called the high-income poverty trap, and women fall into it in a very particular, very quiet way. Nobody trips into this one loudly. There is no dramatic collapse, no single bad decision anyone can point to later and say, that was the moment it all went wrong. It happens the way a slow leak happens, one small justified purchase at a time, until one day the woman with the impressive job title is doing quiet math in her head at checkout, hoping the joke she makes with her friends about being broke is still, in fact, a joke and not an accurate financial statement. Picture this. You get the raise you worked 6 years for. The number on your paycheck finally has that extra digit you used to dream about in your 20s. You tell yourself, this is it, this is the year everything gets easier. And then, somehow, without a single reckless decision, the easier year never actually arrives. That is not a coincidence. That is a pattern. And by the end of this video, you're going to see it everywhere, maybe even in your own bank account. Most women believe wealth begins with a bigger income. Earn more, worry less, that is supposed to be the deal. But many high-earning women discover something else entirely. The income goes up, and so does everything wrapped around it, quietly, invisibly, until the raise has already been spent before it even lands. Nobody warns you about this part. Nobody puts it in the offer letter. That is the hidden truth sitting underneath this entire story. Income and wealth are not the same thing, and almost nobody explains the difference until it is already too late. Whitney did not grow up around money. Her parents worked hourly jobs, and every dollar in that house had somewhere urgent to be. So when she finally became Dr. Cole, the woman with the badge, the parking spot, the 6-figure salary, something in her needed to prove that the struggle was officially over. She bought the house with a primary suite bigger than her childhood bedroom. She bought the car that made the valet guys stand up straighter, which, credit to her, is genuinely a skill. She started paying for her sister's things too, quietly, because that is apparently what you do when you are the one who made it out, even though nobody ever actually asked her to sign up for that job. And look, none of this makes Whitney reckless. It makes her exactly like a lot of women who spent their 20s eating ramen out of necessity and their 30s eating $14 toast out of a kind of quiet, well-earned defiance. The toast is not the problem. The problem is what the toast is standing in for. Here is where it gets interesting. None of that was reckless. None of it was stupid. It was human. It was the entirely reasonable behavior of a woman whose brain still associates a big number on a paycheck with permission to finally exhale. The problem is the exhale costs money, and it costs it every single month, whether the market is up or down, whether the hospital gives bonuses or not. Marissa's story starts somewhere completely different, but ends up in the same room. She did grow up around money, or at least the appearance of it. Her mother dressed a certain way, drove a certain car, and Marissa absorbed a lesson before she ever earned a paycheck of her own. Status is not optional. Status is the entry fee to being taken seriously. So when Marissa finally landed the marketing director title, she did what felt, to her, like basic professionalism. The wardrobe upgraded. The apartment moved to the right zip code. The dinners moved to the restaurants where the right people happened to also be eating. Marissa, meanwhile, would tell you with a completely straight face that her spending is strategic. Investment pieces, she calls them. A blazer is not a blazer. It is a career decision. A dinner reservation is not a dinner reservation. It is networking with extra steps and a better dessert menu. And to be fair, some of that is even true. The trouble is, at some point the strategy stopped having an off switch, and Marissa never noticed exactly when. We will come back to both of these women in a moment because their spending was never really about spending. But first, let's talk about why this trap catches high-earning women so specifically, so often, and so silently. There is a psychological term that shows up constantly in research on income and identity, and it is called lifestyle inflation, sometimes called lifestyle creep. It sounds harmless, almost cute, like a small fashionable upgrade. In practice, it behaves more like a treadmill that quietly increases its speed every time you get comfortable. Financial researchers have coined a term for the people caught on it, calling them Henrys, which stands for high earners, not rich yet. High earners, not rich yet. Sit with that phrase for a second because it describes an enormous number of successful women who assumed income was the finish line, when it was actually just the starting gun. A clinical psychologist interviewed on the topic put it in a way that should honestly be printed on every offer letter in America. Earning money does not make a person feel rich. Spending it does, and that single distinction is the entire trap in one sentence. If a woman spends nearly everything she earns, she will feel wealthy every single day, right up until the moment something breaks, a job ends, a health scare hits, a relationship falls apart, and there is nothing underneath the lifestyle to catch her. And here is the genuinely inconvenient part of that research. It found that a meaningful share of households pulling in $200,000 a year or more are still carrying credit card debt, still living close to the edge of their own paycheck, despite sitting in an income bracket that, statistically, puts them ahead of almost everyone else in the country. Ahead on paper, behind in practice. That gap is the entire show tonight. But that raises another problem, one that goes far deeper than spreadsheets and budgets. Why would a smart, driven, high-performing woman keep making this exact decision, over and over, decade after decade? That is where things stop being about money and start being about something much older. Validation. For a lot of women, spending is never really about the object. It is rarely about the handbag, the car, the renovated kitchen. It is about being seen as someone who has arrived, someone who is not struggling, someone who does not need help, because for generations, women who needed help were treated as women who had failed. That fear does not disappear just because the paycheck got bigger. If anything, it gets louder because now there is more to lose and more eyes watching. Think about the last time a friend casually mentioned a renovation, a trip, a new car in a group chat, and the tiny flicker of competitive panic that showed up uninvited in your own chest, even though logically you knew none of it actually affected your life at all. That flicker is not vanity. It is an old survival instinct, dressed up in a much nicer outfit than it used to wear, still running the same basic program it always has, which is, do not fall behind the group, because falling behind the group used to mean something far more dangerous than an awkward brunch. This is the part where we should probably pause and admit something honestly. If you're the kind of person who enjoys unpacking why people do the financially confusing things they do, particularly the women navigating money, image, and identity all at once, this is exactly the kind of conversation this channel exists for. Subscribing means you will not miss the next one. Now back to Whitney and Marissa, because the twist in their stories is the part that actually matters. Whitney assumed that once her income crossed a certain line, the anxiety about money would simply stop showing up. It did not stop. It changed shape. Instead of worrying about rent, she started worrying about maintaining an image she had built for people who, if she is honest, she barely even likes. Her coworkers, her in-laws, a group chat full of women from residency who she has not seen in 3 years, but still somehow needs to impress. The stress did not shrink when the income grew. It relocated. Marissa's twist cuts even closer to home. Her spending was never really rebellion against a modest upbringing, the way Whitney's was. It was inherited. She was replaying a script her mother wrote decades earlier, a script that said a woman's worth is legible through her appearance, her zip code, her table at dinner. Marissa had, without realizing it, spent 6 figures a year quietly auditioning for her mother's approval, and her mother was not even in the room. Here is the mid-video twist that changes how you should be watching this whole story. The wealth was never the actual transformation these women were chasing. The transformation they actually needed had nothing to do with a number in a bank account. It had to do with separating their sense of worth from their spending entirely, and almost nobody teaches women how to do that because it is much easier to sell another financial product than to sit with a much more uncomfortable question. Who would I be if nobody was watching my lifestyle at all? Researchers studying couples and money have found something else worth mentioning here, something that adds another layer to this entire trap. When women out-earn their partners, the relationship dynamics do not stay neutral. They shift, sometimes in ways nobody in the relationship signed up for. Multiple long-term studies tracking thousands of American households found that men's stress levels actually rise the further their partner's income climbs past a certain share of the household total, even when the total household income stays exactly the same. Meaning, the money is not the variable causing tension. The identity shift is. A woman's financial success can, in certain relationships, quietly rewrite the emotional contract two people never explicitly signed, and very few couples ever talk about it out loud until the resentment has already been sitting in the room for years. That is the layer underneath the layer. It is not just women wrestling with their own relationship to money. It is women wrestling with an entire ecosystem of people, partners, parents, co-workers, friends, who all have unspoken expectations tied to what her income is supposed to mean and what it is supposed to prove. It also explains something that confuses a lot of people from the outside, the fact that a woman can be genuinely thriving on paper and still feel, privately, like she is bracing for something. Bracing for the comment from a partner who says it playfully, but means it a little. Bracing for the parent who brings up someone else's daughter's house at dinner one too many times. Bracing for the friend group, where success has quietly become a competitive sport nobody agreed to enter, but everyone is somehow still playing. None of that shows up on a bank statement. All of it shows up in the body, in the tight shoulders, in the sarcastic joke that is doing a little too much emotional labor for one sentence. So, where does the escalation actually lead? It starts small, saving a little more consistently than last year. It becomes building actual wealth, assets instead of appearances. From there it becomes financial independence, the ability to walk away from a job, a relationship, or a city without checking a spreadsheet first in terror. From there it becomes something bigger than money entirely, personal freedom, the freedom to make relationship choices based on desire instead of dependency. And from there, finally, it becomes something almost nobody expects a video about money to arrive at. Life purpose. Because once a woman is no longer spending her income proving something to an audience, she is finally free to ask what she actually wants her life to look like, without an audience attached to the answer at all. None of this is a call to stop enjoying money, by the way. Nobody climbed out of a decade of student loans just to feel guilty about a nice dinner. The point was never frugality for its own sake. That would be an entirely different and much more boring video. The point is noticing which purchases are actually for you, and which ones are quiet ransom payments to an audience that was never going to be satisfied no matter what you bought them. Whitney eventually noticed the pattern herself, mostly by accident. A slow month at the hospital, a smaller bonus than expected, and a wave of panic that made absolutely no sense for someone earning what she earns. That panic was the moment she finally understood. The size of her paycheck had never been the problem, and it was never going to be the solution either. The real shift happened when she started asking a different question before every purchase. Not, can I afford this? She could always afford it. The real question became, who exactly am I buying this for? Marissa's shift arrived through an even quieter moment, a single unremarkable Sunday afternoon phone call with her mother, where her mother casually mentioned a friend's daughter's new house, the way mothers do, almost as an aside. Marissa noticed the tightening in her own chest, the old familiar urge to immediately think about upgrading something, anything, just to stay ahead in a race nobody had actually asked her to enter. For the first time, she caught herself mid-reflex and simply let the urge pass without acting on it. It did not feel like triumph. It felt like relief, which, it turns out, is usually the more honest signal. Here is the deeper insight underneath this entire story, the one worth sitting with long after this video ends. A high income does not automatically build a wealthy life, and it never has. Wealth is not a paycheck. Wealth is the space between what a woman earns and what she actually needs to feel secure, and that space only grows when she stops financing an identity built for other people's approval. The most dangerous trap for successful women is not debt, and it is not a market downer. It is quietly outsourcing the definition of enough to everyone except herself. Neither Whitney nor Marissa ended up cutting their income in half or moving into a smaller apartment out of some dramatic act of penance. Nothing about their outward life looks radically different today. Whitney still has the car. Marissa still buys the blazer. The difference is invisible to almost everyone except the two of them, and that is exactly the point. The transformation was never supposed to be a spectacle. It happened in the pause before a purchase, in the phone call that did not end in a new credit card charge, in the quiet decision to let a comparison pass through without acting on it. Nobody claps for that. Nobody posts about it. It is simply, finally, enough. Money, in the end, was never really the subject of this story. It was simply the language everyone was speaking while the actual conversation about identity, about worth, about who a woman becomes once nobody else is watching her spend, happened underneath it the entire time. The women who eventually escape the high-income poverty trap are not the ones who earn the most. They're the ones who finally stop asking their bank account to answer a question it was never built to answer, the question of whether they are, finally, enough.